Welcome back to the CQC video tutorial series. This is video 13, Basic CML Part 1. Although most people will not actually ever use it, CQC does include a macro language called CML, and it's a simple but powerful object-oriented language, and you can create quite complex and elaborate solutions without ever using it, and many people do. But if you have some programming skills, you may be able to use it in some ways that would be beneficial to you. The most common use of it is for device drivers, which is how CQC integrates devices into itself. But that's a fairly advanced topic, and we won't get into that here. This is just the use of CML as a very basic extension mechanism by which you can do things within an action that might be a little bit tedious in the actual action system, but you can call a macro and have it process some information for you and give it back in a more convenient format. And that's what we're going to look at today. So the scenario that we're going to look at today is we're going to assume that you have some device that provides a set of key value pairs. So X equals Y, A equals B, and they are just in a string of text, and they're separated by, say, semicolons, just as an example. And let's say the device driver for that device has stored that information in a field somewhere, and so that anyone can make use of it. And you would like to put that information into a list in your user interface. If you have not looked at list browsers in the user interface system yet, they can display a list of values. They can also hold a list of behind the values. So for each visible value, there's a user data value. And in many cases, you want to present the visible values to the user, but you actually want to use the behind the scenes value because that's really the interesting bit of data in terms of processing. So what we're going to do is divide that set of key value pairs out into two lists, which we can then load into a list browser. That would be something quite tedious to do probably in the action system itself, admittedly, but it's fairly straightforward in the in CML. And of course, since it is CML and you're just calling a macro, this could be reused anytime you might have something similar. And you could even further parameterize it, for instance, pass in what is the divider character. So instead of hard coding that it's a semicolon, you could pass that in and so forth. So it could become more reusable. But in our case, we're just going to keep it fairly simple here. Okay, so let's go ahead and just dig in and create our macro here. I've expanded out customize macros, and as is usual, there's a system and user section. Ours will go into user, and I will create, as I did in some of the others, I'll just create a section called mine for our stuff. And so we'll just create a scope called mine, call yours something better. And under there, I'm just going ahead and create something directly under there. This will only be a single class, so there's no need to really create another scope to group it together. So let's just call this one split KVs, which is probably good enough. All right, so if we double click that, we will get the CML editor, and we won't go into a lot of depth here. This is just going to be sort of a accepted as it is for now. And there's lots of written documentation on all of this. This is just a brief overview to get you into how it all works. We can create members here, or we can just create them locally within the method that we're going to call. And in this case, there's just a few, so I'm just going to get rid of this bit here. We don't really need it. And the only real runtime class we're going to use that's not an intrinsic one, the intrinsics are automatically included. Those are numbers and strings and that sort of thing, is just the a string tokenizer we want to bring in, which is under image system, runtime, string tokenizer. It uses a class path scheme, which you may be used to from some other languages. The start method is what is called when a macro is invoked from the outside. So of course, if you create a set of macros and they import each other and call each other, you don't use start. You create instances of it and you directly call it as you would in any other language. But if you're going to be called from the outside, which we're going to do here, we're going to invoke this from a macro, then this is sort of the entry point. So it's like the main of a C++ program or something like that. And we want to be able to pass in a string that has the key value pairs that we're going to parse out. So that's an ingoing parameter, it's a string, and we'll call it invals. And we also need to get out two different lists. And so we'll do the same here. We'll set these will be out string. We'll call this list 1 and list 2. Okay, and they always returns an integer, and 0 means failure, and anything positive means success. And that's what drives the return value of the action. We'll put it in an if to check to see whether it's good or not, and this is what drives that if response. So I'm just going to return 1. In this case, if it made it to the end, then it was good. Okay, so we need a few locals here. We need the tokenizer. And we need strings to break out the current key and value for each one that we pull out. Okay, so first thing we want to do here is probably make sure that those output, oops, I forgot to put that here. You probably noticed that as I was doing it and thinking, what is he doing? So that's also an out string. Okay, so first thing we should probably do is just make sure those output strings are clean, because we're just going to start appending to them. So let's do list1 clear and list2 clear. And we need to set up the tokenizer to tokenize that incoming string. So let's do stoke set, and we give it the input string and the divider characters, which in this case is just semicolon. If I could hit the semicolon key there. Okay, so now all we have to do is basically just loop through the tokens and pull them out until we run out of input. So we'll do while stoke get next token current key. We'll get it into the key first, then we'll split that into 2. Then the end while. And then what we'll do is we know that this has an equal sign between them, so it's A equals B. So we will split it open. If it's not splittable, then we know something is bad. So we'll do if not current key split, and then the current value. This is where we're going to put the second part, and then the character to split on, and then whether it's case sensitive or not, which really doesn't matter in this case because it's an equal sign, so which doesn't have a case. So end if. And so if that failed, then this is bad, and so we can return 0. We could log a message here, but we won't get into that right now. So if that worked, then we have basically our 2 values. We should make sure that there's not any white space on those, so I'm going to strip white space. Actually, those are lowercase, I think. And now we can just basically build up the output strings. And the string tokenizer has a method that is designed to help build the kind of list that we need. If you go look at the documentation for the list browsers, they take quoted comma lists. And that's what we're going to build up here, 2 of those. So stoke, and we'll tell it build quoted comma list. And we give it the string to put in, which for the first one is the keys, and then the list to add to. Now this isn't a list in the sense of a collection. It's a quoted comma list in a string. So we're just adding text onto a string here. And stoke build quoted comma list, and then the current values, or the current value. That should be key, not keys. And out list 2. And essentially that's it. So now what we're going to end up with is out list 1 and out list 2 will end up with a set of quoted comma lists, and we can then get those back on the macro side, or in the action side, and we can load those. So first, let's just make sure this is okay. Let's save and hit F7. And oops, we got a problem there. So just double click and it'll take you to it. Out list 1. Oh, that's just list 1 and list 2, not out list. Yeah, let's try that again. Okay, and that worked. So it says completed successfully. All right, so now we can go create a little template that will call this and make use of it. So let's go to interfaces, user, mine, and we'll just call this one split KVs, same, so that they're easy to keep up with. So let's open that up, and let's just let me size that down a little bit so we can see the whole thing. And so let's create a list browser here. So I'm going to do new browsers, static list browser, and let's put this up there. And I'm going to do a little bit of sizing here to make it look a little better. So I'll just bump the size of those up a little bit. And now I'll just size the actual guy here just so to evenly fit the slots. These lines here are not actually in the output. These are just guides for you. These are where the slots will go. And let's give this guy an widget ID. So we'll call this a list. And now what we can do is just say we'll just do a button, and probably in reality that you would do this as this template loads, but let's just do a button so that we can run it when we want to. So I'm going to do new buttons, and then just a command button, and let's get the action to that. And so this is where we're going to invoke our macro. So let's say if macro engine run macro, that's the only command under the macro engine target. And then we just select the macro to run. And it is mine, split KVs, and then we just need to pass it the values. So first, before we do this, let's actually test that. So I'm just going to save this as is here for the moment. We could actually test this directly here. So if we do Control-Alt-G, that will tell it to go, and it's going to ask for any parameters. So our format is something like A equals B, semicolon, C equals, and let's do some spaces to test our space stuff, and E equals a value. And then we need 2 output strings, which in this case, it doesn't really matter. These are going to go out into variables. So I'm just going to give it variable names. So I'll call it out1 and lvar out2. These will basically more or less be ignored in this case, but we do need the output parameters or it'll complain. So we accept that. It runs up here to begin. Now we want to run it down through here. So let's just put a breakpoint there and go again. And now we can just trace through it here. And let's bring up the method locals here. So we can trace through that. And we split it. It split okay. We get rid of any white space and we add them to the list. All right, we see that showing up there. And we just continue doing that. And that's it. So it all ran fine. Nothing failed. So let's go ahead and try it here. So we pass in something very similar to that. So A equals B, C equals D. We're going to do one like that. And E equals some value with spaces. Okay, and then and now what's going to happen is that anytime there's an output parameter, when you call it like this, that it's going to assume that what you're passing it is the name of a variable, and it's going to put any output written to that output parameter into the variable. So we'll call this one lvar1 out1 and lvar out2. That's what I was talking about earlier when I was putting in this variable names. So what's going to happen now is it will process that, and when we come back, we should have those values in lvar1, lvar out1, and lvar out2. So in theory, that is correct. Let's give this a shot here. Oh, actually, we need to run it, or we need to load it into the list. I won't do anything here for a failure. So we would probably want to double click that to turn it into not. So if not, that means it failed, and we could do something and tell the user and give up, but we'll just assume it worked here. So we want to do command, and we're sending it to the list. Set browser list 2, I think it is. Yeah, so this lets us take 2 different lists. So all we do here is just give it the values inside the 2 variables. So that's out1, and this will be out2. So in theory, that should work, and we should see the values show up. So let's save that, and let's go over to our viewer. And again, this is just all stuff from that's from the AutoGen videos. So mine, split KVs, and if we click that, and there we go, we get our list. And let's just make sure that the background values are in there as well. Let's just create some static text here. I'm doing new textural static text. I'll give it a name output. Size it up a little bit here. And let's go into here, and when we get clicked, so this is when it's on, when an item is selected, let's output the selected info to that static text field there. So we'll do output, set text. And here what we're going to do is use runtime values, which presumably you've already seen. They would have been covered in earlier videos, but we'll right click here, do insert, runtime values. And this gives us a list of things that this particular widget is making available to us. And one of them, which you can't see here because it's off your screen, is the selected text. So we'll put that there, and I'll put a couple spaces and a divider. And then I'll do another one for the background user data. So this is runtime values, and this one is user data. So let's save that. Go back over here. As always, turn off caching if you're testing. And let's reload. And we click the button, we get that. And if we click this, we get the values down there. All right, so there you go. That was a little bit too long, so it wrapped around. I needed to make the output longer. But that's it. And in a nutshell, that's how you would make use of CML as a sort of extension mechanism for actions. Of course, that was sort of a whirlwind tour there, and I don't expect you to have figured it all out from that. But this is just to show you what actually is involved in doing it. And it's not a whole lot. You see that the class we wrote was not very large. And of course, you can get all the information you need on the CML language. One way to start is to go down here to Help Docs. And then in CML here, you can start on the big picture, and this is the reference information. Just double click those. It'll open up the browser with those particular topics already shown. So that's it, and we'll see you in the next video.